You would think by the end of the transfer window, most of the big action would have already taken place, but that is not the case, particularly when it comes to Wonderkids. We've still got some of the biggest names in the Wonderkid market, possibly on the move, wrapping up deals, finding a new home, some for this year, some long term. We got a lot to talk about as the transfer window comes to an end, here on Soccer Wonderkids at the Pitchside Pub. Seasons have already started. You'd think rosters would be solidified, but they're not. We've got some big names possibly still on the move. Some are wrapping up deals, some are just rumors, but there are some big moves that could be potentially career impacting that are happening now at the 11th hour of the transfer window, and that doesn't even include the Vitor Roque deal, which has been finalized now, going from Barcelona to Real Betis in a move that's been, in the works for a long time. And before we get into the rest of the episode today in the news, I do want to talk about Vitor Roque and that move. I'm not going to break down any more of the football in it. We've done that in previous videos. But there was an article that came out this week, and this is relatively serious and important. It was about his final training session at Barcelona, and there were reports that he was breaking down in tears on the move and had to be consoled by teammates, and Hansi Flick, who is a new manager to him, doesn't even probably know him that well. And I think it's really important to remember the human element of these players, particularly when we're talking about Wonderkids. It matters for any player, but particularly with Wonderkids, these are teenagers and 20-year-olds. These are basically children still. I mean, I know we treat them as adults, but think back to when you were 19, or if you are still 19, and the pressure of coming to Barcelona from another country, getting acclimated, the ridiculous expectations, and we've talked about that with Endrick and with Vitor Roque and others, and to feel like you've let down a fan base, let down a city, probably let down yourself, and now you've got to go on loan. It really is kind of devastating, and we look the other way on a lot of that because of the money involved and because we just look at a jersey and we're all rooting for laundry when it comes down to it. But these are real people, and these are kids in a lot of cases, and that story sort of broke my heart, I'll be honest, because he doesn't want to do poorly for Barcelona, and he's not going to want to do poorly for Real Betis, but there's a tremendous amount of pressure, and reading that article really humanized it, and it's important that we remember that. So I wanted to talk about that first before we get into the video, as we talk about other young players moving to other places, and it is exciting, and we love to talk about the potential and what it means for clubs, what it means for teams, what it means for players, but let's always remember that these are people, and in the case of Wonderkids, young people whose lives are affected and involved in all of these moves, and remember to treat it as such, because we can sort of lose that when we talk about it. Now, we do have some big stories to talk about today, but before we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. Get down in that comment section, let me know what you think about all these moves. We've got some big names coming up this week that are some really exciting possibilities here, so get down in that comment section. Leave some comments on Twitter. If you don't follow me on Twitter already, it's at Pitchside Pub, and check out the website Pitchside Pub, pitchsidepub.com, where we produce a lot of extra content on our videos. First up, we've got Youssoufa Moukoko, who we've talked about a lot in these videos the past couple months, or weeks at least, because he's been rumored with a lot of clubs. He was linked with Marseille, he was linked with Real Betis before the Vitor Roque loan deal went through. He clearly wants out of Borussia Dortmund. He just does not think he's going to play enough for his development, and he's probably right about that. And now it looks like he's found a landing spot in Nice, which is a good spot for him. A mid to high table. It's a good club, it's a storied club, but in France, where it's a little lower competition level than what he was going to get in the Bundesliga, and they don't have a ton of depth in those attacker positions, so he should get to play a fair amount. And any of these spots would have been okay landing spots for him, although I'm not rooting for anything good to happen to Marseille at the moment. But any of these spots would have been good landing spots for him. Mid-table in one of the second-tier leagues, either Spain, Italy, or France, all would have been good possible landing spots for him. So the Moukoko saga seems to be just about done. He is in France taking his medicals, and it looks like it's going to go through by the end of this deadline. And that's good for just the general Wonderkid development community, because he's a young player who does need to play and probably was not going to get a ton of time at Dortmund. So it's nice to see this one get through the finish line, and he gets in a landing spot where hopefully he can get a lot of playing time. Now, this one came out of the blue a few days ago, and I did not see this coming. Evan Ferguson, the Brighton Hove Albion striker, who's one of their big-ticket guys that we sort of have earmarked to sell off in the future, has been linked with Manchester City and Arsenal as both clubs still try to solidify their striker situation. The thing about it is Evan Ferguson is not going to be cheap. He's a £70 million type player, probably more than that had he stayed healthy. He came on early last year, had some success, and then battled a number of injuries, and he has not really gotten back in the fold. He hasn't played in their first couple games, and Brighton does have some depth there, so there's no guarantee that even when he is healthy that he's going to play every day. He would be in a rotation. He's too talented not to be, but he's the type of player that when you put him on the market, everybody's head turns. He is one of the next big up-and-coming striker wonderkids in the world. He is that level of talent, which is why clubs like City and Arsenal are going after him. Now, you can immediately, all those heads turn, you can immediately rule out 90% of them because they're not going to have the money to pay what Brighton want for him. And Brighton have no interest and no motivation to sell him for anything less than 100% of the value they think they deserve for him, because he's coming off of injury and they have no need to move him. They are perfectly content to keep him as depth and play him when they can, and he would, once healthy, get back into that striker rotation with some of the other attackers that they have there. But they have no motivation to move him right now unless the price is right. Now, when you're dealing with City, they will never pay more than what they feel for a player, but they have plenty of money. And with Julian Alvarez gone, they've got more money than ever. And so they can lay out £70 million for Evan Ferguson and still have enough to go get another player because of how much they just made off of Julian Alvarez. Arsenal does not. They have spent a ton of money the past few years. Now, we have not heard of any sort of PSR issues with them, but you've got to think they are butting up against that line at some point to the point where a £70 million outlay would be, teetering on an issue. They have not had the massive big sales to offset some of the big acquisitions they've had over the years, Declan Rice, and even dating back to Gabby Jesus and Zinchenko, and a lot of the big money acquisitions that they've had, Kai Havertz. I mean, there's been a lot of them. So I don't know where that money's coming from exactly. I mean, they've got it. I just don't know if they're going to be allowed to spend it. But hey, if they're in the market for this, you have to assume they know what they're doing there. In terms of a landing spot for Ferguson, it's tough. You'd like to see him go somewhere where he's going to play every day once healthy, and City and Arsenal are not that. Now, Arsenal is still looking for a true striker. They've been going makeshift for a couple years now. Evan Ferguson is that, but he's not ready to be it at the Arsenal level right now. Brighton has the luxury of letting youth play and learn and develop because they're really just trying to get like top 6, top 7, right? They're not competing for the title. Arsenal is trying to make moves that get them that last 1% over Manchester City. Now, if Ferguson is not expected to play every day, from an Arsenal standpoint, I love it. I love it because they're using Kai Havertz as a striker, and he's not really a striker, but he's actually doing pretty well in that position. They can work Jesus in. Looks like they're selling Eddie Nketiah, but he has had a role there, so Ferguson would sort of take over for Eddie Nketiah. Jesus is not a guy who they can rely on to stay healthy, and frankly, neither is Ferguson right now, so they're probably thinking, okay, we'll give most of the starts to Havertz. We'll work in Jesus and Ferguson, whoever's healthy, in the games where we want to rotate. Jesus can also play out wide, and so there are minutes to go around, and that would be perfect for them because Ferguson doesn't have the pressure to come in and be the man right away. For Ferguson, is it the best spot? Now, usually I'm banging the drum of young players need to play, but for a guy who has battled injury, that might not be the worst case scenario for him to come and be the backup to Havertz, spot start, come in as subs, get some starts where Havertz can play in other positions. He can play on the wing, he can play that attacking midfield position, so they can rotate guys in, and if he really starts to kick off and play well, then Havertz becomes more of a midfielder again. And so they've got some options there, but he'd get to learn under Arteta, he'd get to learn at the highest level. Honestly, it's not the worst spot for him, even though he wouldn't get to play all the time, because right now I'm not sure, once he's back healthy, you could just throw him out there and say, give me, 3,000 minutes, because he's had some consistent injury issues. City sort of offers the same thing. They're obviously looking for a backup to Erling Haaland. The problem with City for Ferguson is he's never going to have a path to being the man, right? Unless City is really afraid that Erling Haaland is going to get bored at City after a couple years and want to go to, Real Madrid or someplace like that. Not that they have room for him now anyway with Kylian Mbappe. So, there's a lot of moving parts there, but we've heard from the day Erling Haaland landed in Manchester, we've heard rumors that he's been linked to Real Madrid. Of course, we've also heard that he's been linked to Barcelona and they have no money. So take it all with a grain of salt. But as it stands now, there is no path to being the guy at the number 9 position in Manchester, whereas at Arsenal, it could be. It wouldn't be this year, but next year or the year later, he could be, by the time he'll only be in his early 20s still, he could be the man as Havertz finds other spots and Gabby Jesus has moved on and the roster continues to churn over. I don't see that happening at City unless they think Haaland's going to move on. However, from City's standpoint, Alvarez got a lot of playing time. They found a way to play both. Now, Alvarez was better at dropping a little deeper in the midfield. That is not Ferguson's profile. He's more of an out-and-out striker, so it would just be as a deputy to Haaland. But there's enough games to go around. City goes deep in 4 competitions. They'd love to give Haaland a little bit more of a spell. So I could see a situation where he comes in, he plays 20-25% of the time. Maybe Haaland gets an extra game off or two that he wouldn't normally get. Haaland won't see the Carabao Cup. That'll be Evan Ferguson, and they sort of work him in that way, and then probably sell him for even more a year or two from now. That's basically what they did with Julian Alvarez. They got him for a steal, played him when they could. He worked in, played a lot last year, and then they sold him for a ton. It's not exactly the same because Ferguson would not get that sort of playing time, and they're paying a lot for him up front. But you see where I'm going with this. If he comes in at City and plays a quarter of the time and does really well, that 70 is going to grow to 100 because he'll still only be 21, 22, and somebody else will want him. So it's interesting. I think Arsenal's probably a better fit right now. I don't think he'd get any less playing time at Arsenal than he does at Brighton. A little bit less, but not a ton. But really interesting. I'm going on about this one because he's a fascinating player. He's a very high-ceiling young player. And this one was out of left field. Brighton does not need to sell him, but man, if they can cash in again, Brighton will always make the sale when the price is at its highest, even if it's a player that they'd like to keep. We saw that with Moises Caicedo. We saw that with Alexis McAllister. They're not afraid to take a step back in competition to cash the check. And so if Arsenal can really pony up the money, or Man City wants to spend some of that Julian Alvarez money before the deadline, Evan Ferguson's a darn good guy to do it for, and then he gets to go and learn at some of the highest levels. So it's interesting. It's not one I would have seen coming, but I sort of like it, and I'm interested to see how this one plays out. Last but not least, we have a name you may not be familiar with, but should. Bilal Al-Khannouss. He's a 20-year-old attacking midfielder from Genk who is being linked with, and looks like it's going to be finalized with Leicester City. Now, this one has had some trouble getting over the finish line. He is a Moroccan international. He's actually Belgian, but he switched affiliation a few years ago to play for Morocco. He's just coming off the Olympic Games with Morocco, where he played very well, and he was a part of Genk's plan for this year. He's a creator in midfield, an excellent passer. He is renowned for his ability to control the ball in tight spaces and make those advancing passes, which could play phenomenally with a running, cutting Jamie Vardy. And that is what Leicester's missing right now, and this is a massive, massive piece that they could add. The problem was Genk wanted to set a transfer record deal and have him be their highest sale ever. And Leicester just wasn't willing to go that high. Now, it does look like they got a deal done for a more reasonable amount, and it's now he's in Leicester to get his physicals, and it looks like this one's going to get across the finish line. But it was starting to get ugly because the player was now sitting out as the deal was in talks. That he wasn't playing after having played the first couple games. He was sitting out of training. He was saying the club was disrespecting him because he had already come to terms. He had come to terms with Leicester. He wanted to make this move, and Genk was sitting there saying, we want the payday. And so it looks like they finally compromised because they realized they were alienating the player and hurting a valuable asset. And so it looks like this one's going to get across the finish line. Now, relying on a 20-year-old jumping from the Belgian League to the Premier League to be your primary playmaker is a daunting task. And that's why Leicester is looking like they are going to be in the thick of a relegation battle for the remainder of the season. But he's an incredible piece, and it's very low risk for Leicester because If he plays out all year and has a fairly good season, even if he only plays half the time, gets about 50% of the minutes, and comes in as a sub and does some things, people will see the talent, and then if they get relegated, they'll be able to sell him for probably twice as much as they just paid. So there's really very little risk for Leicester, and if they do manage to stay up, they will now have a young core piece of their attacking, sort of setup under Sean Dyche as it is. So there's no risk here really for Leicester unless the player just completely flames out. But this is a good young player and a really strong acquisition for Leicester, and one that I'm impressed to see they went and got, because he was a little bit off the radar. Credit to Leicester's scouting department on this one. What do you think about these moves? Do you want to see them go through? Where do you want to see these players end up? Get down in that comment section. Let me know what you think. You can leave some comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub. While you're at it, hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. And of course, check out the website, pitchsidepub.com. Thanks as always for joining us here on another edition of Soccer Wonder Kids at the Pitchside Pub.